No, this is not March 2020. That's the very clear message from President Biden tonight. But right now, in December 2021, people want to know, can I see my family for the holidays? And what is the White House doing now? Is it too little, too late? We're live in Washington with how the president hopes to make lines like the ones you're about to see a little less common. Plus, we're answering all your medical questions about the Omicron variant in just a minute, including new details on how to get a test. We're also going to get the backstory from one of our reporters who's been covering this virus since the start, Gabe Gutierrez, opening up about pandemic fatigue from COVID's front lines. Plus, it's Congressman versus Congress committee now with a new threat just in the last couple hours from the lawmakers investigating the January 6th riot against a Republican colleague. Will a subpoena force him to talk? And you've heard about defunding the police. So what about refunding them? Some cities are changing their minds and trying to do just that. We'll tell you why in tonight's Original. And just like that, Chris Noth under fire again. The new reaction today from his former Sex and the City co-stars defending the 3 women accusing him of sexual assault. We'll talk about that later in the show. Hey, I'm Hallie. And if Omicron is bumming you out, you're not alone. But to the president, to borrow a phrase, feels your pain, he says. He's rolling out his plan to try and fight the variant that's now the dominant strain of COVID in this country. So here's the deal. The administration will ship 500 million free at-home COVID tests starting next month. You'll have to request one on a new website. They're also sending at least 1,000 members of the military to help out at hospitals, and they'll set up new free testing sites to support the 20,000 that are already out there. President Biden just this afternoon saying this pandemic is not over, but this is also not 2020. He says you can celebrate with family over the holidays if you're vaccinated. And to people who are not vaccinated, this was his message.
You might think you're putting only yourself at risk, but it's your choice. Your choice is not just a choice about you. Your choice can be the difference between life or death.
So check it out. These two charts show just how fast Omicron has spread in the country. The one on the left shows last week, right? You can see Delta makes up 87% of new cases. This week is on the right. And look at that flip. Omicron is now 73% of new cases. It's all Omicron all the time, or at least it's mostly Omicron most of the time. We're covering this pandemic from every angle. We've got Mike Memoli posted up at the White House. Sam Brock is down at a testing site in Miami, and Dr. John Torres is joining us to answer some really important medical questions that you probably have. We'll start at the North Lawn, and Mem, for you here, 500 million tests, right? This is a lot. This is a key part of what the president is rolling out today. But they're also not going to get shipped until next month. And already the president's had to respond to criticism that this is too little, too late. He says, listen, Omicron exploded shockingly fast.
Hallie, this was a speech on the part of the president that was designed to show that his administration is on offense in this fight against the pandemic. But this issue of testing is one in which the White House is very clearly on the defensive. And that was clear when the president was answering questions from us afterwards. He actually seemed to echo what Vice President Harris said when asked about sort of the slow response, at least as far as testing is concerned, by saying no one saw that this would happen so quickly. Remember, Harris tried to clean up, her office did, when she said something similar in an interview a few weeks ago. Another important question that was asked at the White House today was to the White House press secretary, you know, when you go into this new website that the administration is standing up to request these new take-home tests that are going to be made available, how is the White House then going to prioritize who actually gets them? Psaki said, actually, they're going to obviously focus on equity, but that they didn't have an answer to that just yet. So this issue of testing is one that, while the White House's focus up to this point has been on making sure Americans have all the vaccine supply they need, clearly left them behind, especially with all those lines that we see all over the country.
You also heard the president, Mem, as we alluded to at the top of the show, really trying to push the empathy button, right? Kind of saying like, hey, I get it. I hear you. We're all sick and tired of this pandemic. Because listen, everybody, if they're not sick, they are certainly tired, right? I think that's safe to say. He's trying to thread this needle, right, by also saying you still got to get boosted. There are still steps you have to take. And the numbers are moving and changing so quickly. You think about just 2 weeks ago, the press secretary kind of downplayed the idea of putting out rapid tests. And look, here we are now.
Yeah, the idea they embraced today was one they had dismissed just a few weeks ago. And listen, this team at the White House has always really prided itself on having a sense of where maybe not the loudest group of Americans are, but where the majority of Americans are. And I think it was so interesting. You heard it when the president began his remarks, and he ended his remarks by acknowledging the frustration that so many Americans have at this point. He said he's frustrated as well, but then he tried to make it clear that we're a long way from where we were at the start of this pandemic, even on the issue of testing. The White House has also been at pains to say there were no take-home tests available at the start of the year. There are now 8 different approved tests, and we're now buying a whole heck of a lot of it to share with the American people. But this is a very difficult needle to thread for this White House, especially with a population that is inclined perhaps to support him, but is just so frustrated at this point, and he needs to show action.
What was also interesting and what caught my ear is the president talking about how it's people's patriotic duty, right? Their obligation to their country to get boosted. And he had a message that to me seemed very much intended to be delivered to people living in red states, right, who are not vaxxed or boosted. I want to play what he had to say.
I got my booster shot as soon as they were available. And just the other day, former President Trump announced he had gotten his booster shot. Maybe one of the few things he and I agree on.
Ma'am, President Biden is very clearly and very intentionally invoking the name of former President Trump, which he doesn't often do.
There's an audience that the White House hopes was listening to the president today, and there's an audience that they know probably was not. That's actually a message for the one that probably isn't listening or wouldn't be listening, but maybe now will because he referred to the former president. And you've seen some members of the administration actually retweeting what the former president said about getting his booster, saying, listen to the former president. You're not going to see that a lot from this White House, Hallie. You know that. But while the president also called attention to what he even gave them credit, right, saying we were one of the first countries to get a vaccine because of the prior administration, he then called them out for the purveyors of disinformation, as he called it.
Yeah, really slamming the idea of disinformation and misinformation around the vaccine. Mike Memoli, great to have you on the North Lawn. Thank you, my friend. Let's get outside the Beltway with Sam Brock, who's got the view from Florida down there at a testing site. Sam, listen, there have been long lines everywhere, right, all across the country. I want to show some of them. New York, here in D.C., in Dallas, in Miami, where you are. And when you look at the numbers specifically in Florida, you've had the average tripling just this week alone. Tell me what you're hearing from folks that you're talking to about this testing push by the president, right? About this new move, this new sort of phase of the pandemic response that the White House is rolling out today.
Well, there's definitely concern, Hallie. The test positivity in Miami-Dade, which is the biggest chunk in Florida, certainly we've seen the most number of cases growing exponentially here, is 10% right now. For the state, it's 5%, and those figures have all doubled recently. But I just talked to the site manager here at Tropical Park, where I'm standing. 8,500 tests yesterday. He said about 1 in 5 were positive. My math is not amazing, but 20% is double what 10% was. So we are already seeing this additional spike coming right now, and it's happening at a time when all these people behind me right now have been waiting for about 3 or 4 hours. They would so much rather, Hallie, go home and take an at-home test kit and do it that way. I just checked Amazon.com. One test from Lucira right now, $89.99 on Amazon. If you wanted to buy a 90-pack, it's $1,500. That's what it's like right now, trying to obtain testing kits at home. So instead, folks are coming out and they're waiting all day to try to get tests. I spoke with them. A lot of them told me it's worth the hassle right now, especially with the holidays coming up. Here's a sample of what they told me. You're willing to wait 3 hours to make sure that you're safe?
Even 5, whatever it takes. We were going to have like 12 people, and we canceled because we have a little baby grandson, and we have to take care of him.
That family, Hallie, pulled the trigger on that decision not to get together as a family for Christmas today. So many people right now had their plans, and some are going through with them, but so many others are forced to call an audible because it's gotten so extensive.
What I cannot help but think about, Sam, as I talk to you, standing, and I just checked my weather app, in 73-degree Miami, right? I'm in 37-degree Washington, meaning as far as the temperature. You have an advantage in that people in South Florida, they can spend the holidays outside. That helps, right? That's one of the things. That's one of the precautions that we hear about, that's really important for people to do if they can. Obviously, it's easier to do where you are than where I am, you know?
When it's not raining, and I know you have relatives in Florida, I'm pretty sure you mentioned that the last time we talked here. When it's not raining, yes, you can go outside. I can also tell you that public health officials, the one thing they are the most concerned about right now over these holidays is people sharing meals, especially if it's mixed households. Some people aren't vaccinated. That is the #1 concern. What they say is take advantage of every opportunity you have to be outside in well-ventilated spaces or preferably outdoors.
Right.
I spoke with Mayor Danielle Levine-Cava here in Miami-Dade. Here's what she told me about that.
Please move your parties outdoors. We're coming on Christmas, New Year's. This is the time to really exercise restraint and personal responsibility. Those can be super spreader events because this Omicron variant is a killer.
Hallie, 191% increase in cases in Florida in just the last 2 weeks. We have already seen signs of those cases right now going up so precipitously. And of course, we are not even at the Christmas holiday yet.
I would be remiss in letting you go, Sam. Folks, our loyal viewers will know that we often bring you on to talk sports. So I got to talk sports with you because I know there are some, I'm sure, disappointed Florida Panthers fans down by you who aren't going to be able to go. NHL is pausing its season now for the next week, and they're really not the only, league that has taken some of these precautions as we're seeing this spike, right?
You find yourself right now, if you're a sports fan, in a position where your head is going back and forth on a swivel with every new development. For the NHL, for example, it's not just the pause for 2 days before this Christmas break. The national hockey team, according to ESPN, is not going to be participating in the Olympics because of COVID-19. And other sports leagues right now, the NFL and the NBA, are now postponing games, moving them on when they said they were never going to do that, changing their policies full scale. In the NFL right now, there's right now a pulling back of testing of vaccinated asymptomatic players, presumably because they don't want those players to get positive and be out of the field of play. It is a real conundrum right now for sports leagues. How do we simultaneously continue our operations and preserve public health? They're all trying to thread that needle.
Sam Brock in Miami, live for us tonight. Sam, thank you. Dr. John Torres, come on into the conversation here. And in a second, I want folks to know, we're going to do a lightning round, right, of questions that we've solicited, questions that I know people want to know about their gatherings for the holidays. But let me ask you before we get there broadly about the message that we heard from President Biden, because he was really clear, right? He said if you are vaccinated and you take certain precautions, you should feel comfortable hanging out with your family over the holidays. Is that the right message? Is that supported by the public health sort of epidemiologists and apparatus right now?
And Hallie, it is the right message. And I think what you heard there were messages going in two different directions. One is you need to get vaccinated. If you're not vaccinated, you're at risk of getting seriously ill and at risk of dying from this. If you are vaccinated, that risk is much, much lower. At the same time, the other message is we need to learn how to live with this virus. This virus is not going away. Not something he said, but basically the tone he said here is we're not going to vaccinate enough people to keep the unvaccinated safe. Everybody needs to get vaccinated at this point. And that's the direction he's moving in, and I think that's the direction we do need to go in, Hallie.
We talked about this spike in tests, right? The idea that there's going to be 500 million. That's 500 million at-home tests for free, Dr. John. That's a lot. That is obviously a good thing. They're not going to get shipped till next month, after the holidays, right? When some experts are saying, hey, the worst of Omicron might have hit us by then. Is this too little too late in your view?
You know, it's certainly a slow start, but it is a start and a start in the right direction. You know, experts have been talking for months about we need to get more tests. We need to get tests in people's hands. Tests that are either free or very inexpensive. And so this is a push in the right direction. Like you mentioned, 500 million, but there's 330 million people in this country. And so you can imagine these tests, if you need 1 or 2 tests a week for everybody in your family, that is going to occupy that 500 million very quickly. Plus, just like back when vaccines started, just like back when testing first started 2 years, a year and a half ago, the website is going to be overwhelmed very quickly. And so people are going to have patience in January. Not going to help us now, though, and getting tests now is going to prove difficult. So, again, that's something that we're going to have to learn how to deal with. And he is actually putting out some forces out there to try and get that under control right now, too.
I talked with the mayor of New York City, Bill de Blasio, just a couple hours ago, actually, this afternoon, who, as we know, has the world's biggest New Year's Eve celebration right in his city next week. I wanted to ask him how he's preparing, because he's somebody else, Dr. John, who's talked about he doesn't want to go back to this shutdown life. Here he is.
It is vaccination only right now, but there are additional measures we're looking at.
Like what? Like
I don't want to go into it until we've worked them through with the doctors, but I can tell you this much. There's more we can do to add to the health and safety approach.
So that's de Blasio talking about the potential for adding additional requirements to those Times Square celebrations. You already have to be vaxxed to get in. Micro level, is that enough? And on the macro level, What's your message to people who want things to get back to normal, who want to not have to worry about stuff like, am I safe in Times Square on New Year's Eve?
You know, Times Square 2 years ago, where you had so many people crowded into such a small area, no, that's not enough, because even with vaccination rates being at 100%, you still could have issues. Mandating booster shots in that instance could be another additional measure they take, making sure that the crowds are limited so people can social distancing, making masks mandatory. All these things that we know work can be very beneficial at keeping people safe. But remember, these are still high-risk environments, and so I think we are going to see some numbers go up after these events.
Let me do a lightning round with you. You ready?
I am.
Okay, we're going to tick through a bunch of questions, right, that I think folks might have as we head into the holidays. Number one, should people feel comfortable indoor dining right now?
No, because what's happening is you can't ventilate, you can't social distance very well, and that puts your risk higher.
What about if you're masked and you want to go to a concert or a movie theater or do something indoors for the holidays, like an event with other people?
It depends on how crowded that event is and whether you can actually social distance and everybody else around you is vaccinated and masked as well. If not, I'd say hold off on that for a while.
Should we feel comfortable getting on a plane?
You know, the planes right now, everyone has to be masked, so the risk is high there because not everybody's necessarily vaccinated, but at the same time, ventilation is good on the airplane, so I think you can be okay on the plane.
What about outside? You know, through most of this pandemic, it felt like going outdoors, we saw that there was just not much evidence the virus was spreading incredibly rapidly outside. Is that the same with Omicron? Do we need to be putting our masks back on outside, or are we okay if we're outdoors?
If you're outside in a setting where you can social distance, then you don't need masks necessarily. But if it's a setting where you can't maintain that social distance and the ventilation isn't very good, as if then there's a few walls and the breeze can't get through there, then you might want to think about masking at that point.
Any other precautions we need to be thinking about outside? I think for a lot of people, that's like a safe space, right, in this pandemic. Well, if I'm outdoors, I'm kind of okay.
What I would do is move to an area where there's good ventilation outdoors, because not every area is equal, making sure that people are masked if there are unvaccinated people in that crowd, especially if there's younger or elderly who might be more vulnerable.
Should people be chugging OJ, like, to boost their vitamin C right now to try and keep Omicron away? Like, is there anything we can be doing to help our immune system as we head into the holidays?
Yeah, I love OJ. It tastes great, but OJ in this instance, other than doing it on a regular basis, it's not going to boost your immune system in the short term.
Okay.
Fruits, vegetables, those things your mom always told you to eat and drink, those are the things you need to do right now, not just now, but for months and years to come.
Dr. John Torres. Love this lightning round so much that we want to do it again. So please come back later in the week. We actually want to open this up to our viewers rather than, thank you, Dr. John, rather than just, folks we know. Tell me, what questions are you asking? What questions do you want to know ahead of the holidays with Omicron surging? We're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, we're on Insta. It's very easy. It's the same handle on all of them. Hallie on NBC. Hit us up with your Omicron questions. Tomorrow, December 22nd, 5 o'clock Eastern, we will air their answers. If you're planning to travel for this holiday, you are not alone, with the TSA screening a record number of passengers, more than 2 million a day since last Thursday. That's more than 1 million more than last year on this day. And they think they'll get to 30 million people through the start of the new year. But here's the thing. There's also been a record number of cases of bad behavior by passengers. More than 5,600 cases have been reported this year alone. Not great, gang. Just yesterday in Miami, look at what happened. An officer, it looked like even had to pull his gun during a fight at a gate. It's not totally clear what happened. You can see his hand on his hip there. But we do know police were called to the gate over somebody that apparently taken the keys to an airport golf cart. Things escalated. This video got posted online showing people trying to get involved after an officer appeared to have somebody in a chokehold. Once he was released, he seemed to chase after the officer, hit him, it seems, before the officer then puts his hand and pulls out his gun. 2 people were arrested in this whole thing. The January 6th Select Committee is really firing back tonight after Republican Congressman Scott Perry from Pennsylvania said not thanks but no thanks, more like thanks but hell no to the committee's request to talk with them. Right? You have a committee spokesman saying tonight, just in the last couple hours, that if members with directly relevant information decline to cooperate and instead try to cover up, the Select Committee will consider seeking such information using other tools. Remember that phrase, other tools. We'll talk about it in a second. Perry is the first known lawmaker to be contacted by the House January 6th committee. This is really sort of congressman versus Congress here. And he today tweeted that he declines the request for information. He's going to continue to fight the failures of the radical left who desperately seek distraction from their abject failures of crushing inflation, a humiliating surrender in Afghanistan, and the horrendous crisis they created at our border, taking shots, obviously, at Democrats. Remember, the whole thing started when Select Committee Chairman Benny Thompson sent Perry a letter saying they have evidence connecting him to events around the insurrection, including some involvement in trying to make Jeffrey Clark the acting attorney general. Clark's that former DOJ official who helped push former President Trump's false claim that the 2020 election was stolen. That was a lie. And they say that Perry was talking with the White House about allegations that Dominion voting machines had been corrupted. That's a conspiracy theory. That means it turned out not to be true. I want to bring in now Sahil Kapoor. Okay, so we've gone through, Sahil, the back and the forth and the back again, right? So the initial request, Perry rejecting it, the committee then saying we're going to use other tools. What's interesting about that is the initial letter, the initial request for information from this committee was voluntary. Seems to me like when they say we're going to use other tools, that means a subpoena. Is that pretty inevitable at this point, a subpoena from some members of Congress against one of their colleagues?
Hallie, I wouldn't say it's inevitable only because they're saying they will consider it. Now, a subpoena is their other tool. It's not really clear what else they would do. They can subpoena a member of Congress. They can subpoena someone if they refuse to cooperate. They can try to enforce that subpoena. That is what they've done with everybody else. But this is a whole other type of issue here, where they're going after a member of Congress. There's no modern precedent that experts are aware of, maybe no precedent at all, for subpoenaing a member of Congress to testify as part of an oversight project. So they're in uncharted waters here, and there's a sense that the committee needs to tread cautiously, because whatever they do here could be cited down the road for future committees in Congress and could affect all of them. Would Congressman Perry have any special protections against a congressional subpoena, given that he's a member of Congress, or no? It's not clear that he would necessarily. I think the main concern, I mean, of course, he'd get to vote on, a contempt report for himself, potentially, to enforce that subpoena. It's just a bizarre situation, and it hasn't come up before. And look, the committee is conflicted between two objectives. In the statement, Benny Thompson, the chairman, talked about how the committee has profound respect for the prerogatives of members of Congress and respect for their privacy, but they have a solemn responsibility to pursue the facts on January 6th. And it just so happens that a member of Congress appears, based on evidence that the committee has gathered, to be deeply involved with the effort to overturn the 2020 election. We know that Congressman Perry, was one of the people who voted against the certification, right, of the election results on January 6th. Talk about why he is so critical here. Like, why is he the first in this? Listen, Sahil, it's an escalation, right? Everybody sort of saw this coming for the reasons that you explained. But talk about why Scott Perry was number one in the eyes of the committee for this. The committee says they have obtained evidence that Scott Perry tried to elevate then Assistant Attorney General Jeffrey Clark to acting AG so that Jeffrey Clark could have the Justice Department sign off on a letter making fabricated claims about widespread voting irregularities as a way to get Georgia and other states to not certify Joe Biden's victory. Clark was overruled by his successor, and that's where Scott Perry comes in, that the committee says they have evidence that he was communicating with the White House, including then Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, through text messages, through the encrypted app Signal, trying to get Jeffrey Clark elevated, and also spreading conspiracy theories about Dominion voting machines. So it looks like the committee believes they have a critical mass of evidence that this person is significant and that he's critical to their investigation in terms of figuring out what happened and what led to the events of January 6th. Sahil Kapoor. Sahil, thanks so much for breaking that down for us tonight. I appreciate it. Coming up here on the show, that new warning from the Russian president threatening a military response for anybody thinking about getting involved with that conflict on the Ukrainian border. Courtney Kuby is live to tell us how the Pentagon is responding. This is interesting after the break. Russian President Vladimir Putin today throwing a smoldering stick of dynamite on this fire, right, over tensions over the Russian military buildup on the Ukrainian border. Today, he did something. He threatened military measures. So he threatened a possible military response in response to any aggression, he says, by the U.S. and NATO allies in Ukraine. Here's what's going on. Russia is upset at what they say is a growing military presence in Ukraine from the U.S. and NATO allies. Why? Well, Ukraine wants to become a part of NATO. But Russia says no, because they feel like this would be, and more military activity would be a security threat to their own borders. You might remember President Biden talked with Putin just 2 weeks ago, saying if Russia launched an attack on Ukraine, the U.S. would slap down some sanctions on him.
And the Biden administration has this $200 million package of additional military assistance they haven't yet sent over there. Joining me now from the Pentagon is Kornacki. So, Courtney, we know the Pentagon is watching this troop buildup. They're listening to Putin really closely. How seriously are they taking this, new verbal grenade from Putin here? Is it just him popping off, do they think, or is it real?
They're taking everything that happens in this very seriously. So, not just what Vladimir Putin said today, and the Russian defense minister, by the way, but what they are seeing actually happen on the border. That's what's really got eyes wide open here right now. It's not just this huge buildup that's occurred, tens of thousands of troops, but they actually have logistics capabilities on the other side of the border from Ukraine. That's something that's really been a game changer in the past several weeks. They now have some medical, some fuel. They have the ability to, not completely, but to largely supply an extended and support an extended campaign with their military forces. That's what's really got people kind of worried here at the Pentagon. But the one saving grace that I keep hearing about is there is an assessment that Russia is not likely to invade right now because the ground's not frozen. Russia uses a lot of tanks. They are worried about their tanks literally getting bogged down in the mud. So until the ground is really frozen, there seems to be, it seems like a very strange, simple thing, but it is actually a very real concern for the Russian military. So the U.S. military and the defense officials and officials who I'm speaking with seem pretty confident that they have several weeks here left before Vladimir Putin really makes the decision whether he's going to invade or not.
It's just so interesting, Court, because it's okay, what, next cold snap on the Ukrainian border? And then, you know what I mean? And then it really starts to, be a bigger concern. It's kind of fascinating how the machinations of this work.
Exactly. And my argument to that was, well, isn't it already really cold in Ukraine? The ground's not actually frozen yet. And I'm told January is the time frame that they're really looking at.
Okay. Let's talk about the assistance that Ukraine needs, right? We know that the U.S. gives help, gives military assistance already, right? What is Ukraine asking for now? How is it different from what we already send over?
So the U.S. has been sending over, in fact, they just completed a $60 million package to Ukraine. And there is this sort of continuing supply of largely non-lethal equipment that the U.S. provides to them. But there's this $200 million package there. What's different, some of these are the same equipment that they already asked for, and the U.S. has already sent Javelin missiles. What's different now, though, is Ukraine is asking for some things like some anti-ship missiles, also some air defenses. So the kinds of things that they would be able to stop incoming missiles and incoming rockets, mortars, whatever, from coming into Ukraine, presumably from Russians. This package, though, this foreign military sales package has been sitting at the White House for several weeks. It still has not been approved. And according to a number of officials I've spoken with, there's this internal debate about whether approving some of this equipment, whether that would be seen as provocative by the Russians and it might only seek to inflame the tense situation. The U.S., though, at the same time, the U.S. could provide them with some non-lethal aid, and there are a lot of people on the Hill who are really pushing for that. So things like medical equipment, some more supplies for their logistics, fuel, coal. The U.S. also could provide them with things like ammunition, so potentially defensive equipment. But at this point, there is still no movement with that package. I'm told, in fact, there's not just that one $200 million package, but there's even another package that if Russia invades, the U.S. would then move forward with that second, even larger package of equipment.
I'm telling you, Cor, I love hearing about the conversations that you're having with your many sources there at the Pentagon. It's incredibly helpful, really good context. Thank you, friend. Appreciate it. Coming up here on the show, an end to the Kellogg's strike. Workers finally got themselves a new labor contract. We'll tell you what's in it and why that matters in the 5 things. And even with the president saying today that it is not March 2020, for some folks, it feels like that kind of pandemic fatigue. In tonight's Backstory, we'll check in with Gabe Gutierrez, who's been reporting on this since the very start. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, a Washington state man who assaulted police officers during the January 6th riot has been sentenced to almost 4 years in prison. He's the guy in the green hat. You saw him in that picture and this one here, Devlin Thompson. He's going to serve 46 months for his role in the insurrection. He helped take riot shields from police officers and hit a police officer with a baton. Number 2, California is taking Walmart to court. Why? Over alleged waste dumping. Prosecutors say the retail giant illegally chucks more than 1 million dangerous items a year into state landfills, stuff like batteries, aerosol cans, toxic cleaning supplies. The company, in response, is calling the lawsuit unjustified. Number 3, P&G, Procter & Gamble, voluntarily recalling almost 36 of its hairsprays. Take a look at this picture on your screen if you use hairspray. That's because a chemical linked to cancer was found in them. The company says it's doing a full review of all this after finding traces of benzene. P&G says it'll pay back customers who recently bought any of the hairsprays that are recalled. Number 4, that Kellogg's strike is over. The 5-year deal approved today ends this walkout by 1,400 workers that went almost 3 months. The union says they're getting cost of living raises, an end to the tiered pay system, and a promise from Kellogg's not to shut down any factories through 2026. Number 5, Queen Elizabeth has canceled her traditional Christmas plans, and you can probably already guess why, because of the Omicron surge. She usually celebrates at her Sandringham estate. Instead, she's going to keep it low-key at Windsor Castle. This is the 2nd year in a row the royal families had to scrap their travel plans and their holiday lunch. Time now to get the backstory, our behind-the-scenes look at how a story comes together and how it fits into our bigger picture. We've talked about how the federal government is sending emergency medical teams to hospitals in the 6 states that you see on your screen. According to the Department of Health and Human Services, about 69,000 Americans are in the hospital right now. They're in the hospital tonight, as we speak, with COVID. More than 20% of ICU beds nationwide are being used for COVID-19 patients, right? That's 1 in 5 hospital beds in the ICU. Our Gabe Gutierrez has been covering this pandemic from the very start. He's been on the front lines at hospitals, talking to people that have to fight this virus every day, and joins me now to talk more about his reporting. And Gabe, I'm so glad that you're with us because, you know, you and I don't know, people don't know this, and I'm happy. We're buds, you know what I mean? Like outside of the office workplace. And I know that in our conversations kind of away from the camera, we talk about what an amazing job you do and what incredible work you do. And I know that it can't be easy, my friend. You've been in Queens, you've been all around the country. We're showing some of the video from it now. How are you doing, man?
That's very kind of you to say, Hallie. It has been a long 21 months covering this pandemic. And, you know, I'm fortunate to have a great team with me. And actually, by chance, today, some of the folks that have been covering this pandemic with the entire time are with me today behind the camera. Bill Angelucci, Tony McGowan on audio, Carolina Gonzalez, the producer I'm with as well. So thankfully with them, we've been able to get through this so far. What I will say, Hallie, and look, you've covered natural disasters before. This is unlike anything that we've ever had to cover, right? There was so much uncertainty at the beginning back in March of 2020. I can remember being here in New York, standing in front of COVID testing centers, much like this one, and the lines were long back then. They're long again now. We really have come such a long way in so many ways. At the same time, visually, yes, it's, you know, sad to see the testing lines creeping up again, just like they are. But Hallie, it's a very different scenario now than it was a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
You know, we really have come such a long way. And if you ask me how I'm doing, look, it has been a very stressful year and a half. It's just been so difficult to see some of the things that we've seen inside those hospitals. Some of the things that have stuck with me, Hallie, I spoke with a couple months ago in Montana, this 24-year-old who regretted not getting the vaccine. He seemed to be getting better. His name was Patrick Bershia, and he passed away 2 weeks after I spoke with him. And it was just so heartbreaking to see somebody who wanted another chance at life and did not get it. That story stuck with me. Another story from Montana, another story from Billings, Montana, at a different hospital in October of 2020. A nurse that, simply, his name was Joey Traywick. He said he was absolutely broken. He said that so many healthcare workers have been broken. And doing these interviews with these healthcare workers, interviews with family members that have been impacted by COVID, it has been a lot, frankly, but thankfully this is what we do. I had no other choice but to do this, and in my mind, how could we not report on this pandemic? And I appreciate the time that you have given this story over the past year and a half as well.
Oh, of course, Gabe. I mean, listen, one of the things that I think about is how you and Tony and Bill, who's they're both amazing, and Carolina, who's amazing, how you stay safe as you're doing this reporting, right? Have you changed any of the precautions that you're taking? I know you're always masking and social distancing and all of that, but how does that work in the field now?
Yeah, and that is something that certainly a lot of viewers have had questions about, and some may even be looking at me right now asking me why I'm not wearing a mask, outside of this testing center, and that has been an evolution in terms of what we've known about this virus. Remember, at the very beginning, we did not know quite as much as we do now about how the virus is transmitted outdoors versus indoors, and yes, that's something we take into consideration. Now we mask up when we're indoors doing an interview, with certain exceptions. When we're outside, we do not wear a mask, but we try to socially distance. We do go through all these processes behind the scenes to prevent ourselves from getting sick, to keep our family members sick. Thankfully, I can say, knock on wood, that I have not contracted COVID during all of this, and I am vaccinated and boosted. So all the precautions that our entire team takes. But certainly, yes, behind the scenes, a lot of discussions early on, Hallie, from the folks at NBC about how to keep teams safe, limiting travel. But for me, there was nothing. I couldn't see myself not covering, the story of our generation, and really being out there and telling, being able to convey the severity of this to our viewers.
I imagine it's an honor and a responsibility, and that's a heavy weight, Gabe. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think about David Verdi and Stacey Brady, colleagues that you and I know who are working to keep us safe every day, even now in this surge. I only have 30 seconds left. I could talk to you about this for 4 hours, but is there anything that surprised you, Gabe? Is there anything that you didn't expect, besides the stuff that we all didn't expect, but as a storyteller and as a journalist through the course of your reporting on this?
I guess, Hallie, I maybe was a little surprised early on. I'm no longer surprised at the backbreaking work that our healthcare workers have done and did since the very beginning. And that over and over again in these interviews, even now, it is an honor to speak with them each and every time. And really quickly, because I know we got to wrap, and I'm sure your producer is telling you, it did surprise me just yesterday when I heard that the Omicron variant had become 73% of all these new cases. It seems just last week it was just 13%. I was stunned to see how quickly this latest variant spread. Thankfully, though, symptoms appear to be more mild. Let's just hope it stays that way.
Gabe Gutierrez, you will never get a rap cue from this show, my friend. Thank you so much for being on with us and for sharing some of the behind-the-scenes story of what it's been like covering this. I appreciate it. We talk about the pandemic. We talk about now a new twist on this, right? How might the pandemic affect politics as we get ready to head into a midterm year? Steve Kornacki already looking ahead to 2022. You're going to find him not at the big board, but at a medium board. You'll see right after the break. You know the phrase defund the police. You probably heard it a lot at the height of social justice protests over the last couple years. But now some big cities seem to be walking that back, trying to refund police departments instead. Zincle Esenwa explains why in the original. But first, NBC covers hundreds of stories every day. And because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. From our friends at News 4 Washington, turns out schools in the D.C. area seem to be suffering from not enough substitute teachers. That's probably because of a really strong job market and concerns over COVID. The station looked at 8 big school systems in the area. Almost 2/3 of the 64,000 substitute teacher requests went unfilled during the first couple months of the school year. Out of our New York bureau, they're reporting a New Jersey man who posed as a former New England Patriots player to buy and sell Super Bowl rings will plead guilty to fraud. The scam started in 2017 when this guy bought a ring off some Patriots player, unnamed, paid for it with a bad check, then sold it. He then used that player's name to buy more rings and resell them for a profit. He even had Tom Brady's name engraved on them. And out of our LA bureau, a high school football team from California's School for the Deaf got rewarded for their historic run for a championship with a surprise from Kelly Clarkson and the cast of Spider-Man. They didn't end up winning the championship, but their story touched so many people across the country. So look at this. Kelly Clarkson had him on their show and gave them $25,000 to help pay for a new stadium. That is amazing. Now to today's original, with in-depth reporting on a topic that we've been watching. After protests against police violence in the summer of 2020, you heard a lot of calls in a lot of cities to defund the police, right? So we checked back in a little over a year later. Some of those same cities are actually changing their mind. They want to refund their police departments. Here's Zincle Esenwa to explain why.
George Floyd's murder by a police officer in 2020 sparked calls to defund the police in cities around the country. Oakland was one of them. Its city council supported reducing the city's police department budget by 50% over 2 years, July 2020. But this week, the council, including Lauren Taylor, voted to partially refund, approving 2 police academies.
We have a situation where we have unfortunately allowed our police staffing to get to levels that are lower than, frankly, we need for our residents.
Likewise, in Floyd City, Minneapolis, council members once pledging to defund or reallocate funds from police, now choosing a different position.
Why change your stance?
I never changed my stance. Crime has increased significantly in Minneapolis as it has all around the country.
Andrea Jenkins and 9 other council members voted to partially refund the Minneapolis Police Department by millions, restoring it near to levels held before Floyd's killing.
We must have a both and approach to public safety.
Jenkins and Taylor say that both and approach includes both adding funding to alternative safety measures like mental health services, which take time to develop and implement, and funding police departments.
Why are cities suddenly refunding the police?
During the pandemic, there has been an increase in crime. That has sparked concerns of a crime wave in which police are often a short-run solution.
The U.S. murder rate hit its highest single-year increase in a century in 2020, up by 30%. Now, many cities are changing course. NYC approved a budget shifting $1 billion away from police June 2020.
I vote aye on all.
1 year later, $200 million restored. Portland City Council cut $15 million from its police budget June 2020.
I am proud to vote aye.
By November 2021, the council unanimously approved adding $5.2 million back to the budget. Baltimore's mayor, who once slashed the proposed budget by millions, now proposing a $27 million increase. Leadership of these cities cite pressures outside the defund movement. In a statement, a spokesman for Baltimore's mayor said, in part, the increase was driven by personnel costs. A spokesperson for Portland's mayor told NBC in part that they were required to cut some funding across the board. New York's mayor did not immediately respond to our request for comment. This new wave of reallocating funds, just as the public stance on defund, is also shifting. More adults now in favor of increased policing. Still, issues that reignited calls to defund remain, with continued public outrage at Black people disproportionately killed by law enforcement, and fatal police encounters repeatedly caught on camera.
These communities in which they're over-policing and aggressively policing, they also need more support, more resources.
Many activists still calling for radical criminal justice reforms.
So was it all talk last year? Were you all just appeasing activists, but knowing that it might not happen a year later?
It is an aggressive goal, but something worth marching toward is having less investment into the punitive side of public safety.
And officials like Taylor and Jenkins say defund the police, an issue often framed in black and white, is anything but.
We need police to be a part of the community, to work together with Black and brown communities and not as an oppositional force, and really be a part of helping to build a better society.
Zinkley is joining us now. So Zinkley, you talked about how the refunding isn't just going to police departments at this point, right? Talk about where else that money's going.
Yeah, a lot of the council members point out that it's not just police departments, it's also going to mental health services. Oakland is actually trying to launch an alternative community response program as soon as January.
Our thanks to Zinkley Esimwaf for that. As we talked about just a little bit ago on the show, President Biden today in his remarks to the nation mentioned former President Trump got his booster, saying it's about the only thing they agree on. And of course, President Biden ran in 2020 criticizing former President Trump's response to the pandemic, saying he would manage it better. Now, with Omicron surging, the pandemic might play a big role in the midterms, which are less than a year away. Steve Kornacki is, of course, geared up already for 2022. He joins me now. So, Steve, listen, talk to me about the president's handling of the pandemic and how you see this playing in politically as we're looking ahead to the midterms, which, by the way, that's not like way far out in the future. Those primary races are totally in full swing now.
Yeah, no, the landscape is already coming into focus. Some of these campaigns are pretty much in full swing right now. Obviously, the backdrop for every individual race in 2022 will be the president, will be what Democrats have had now for the past year, which is, control of the presidency, the House, and the Senate. In the nature of the midterm election is the party with that kind of power has not fared too well, just as a historical rule in midterm elections. In terms of Biden and COVID, I think one of the striking things is you've asked this question, I think, in poll after poll in 2021. Joe Biden's handling of COVID, the numbers have dropped basically through the year. I think the most recent round of polling has shown Biden for the first time with a slightly higher negative score on his handling of COVID than a positive score. At the start of the year, it was his strongest area in polling. I think you could see, back in February, March of 2021, polling had Biden's approval on his handling of COVID up around 70%. Now I've seen polls where it's dipped under 50%. And of course, his overall job approval rating sits on average about 44% right now. So, we say the historical rule is the party with the White House has trouble in midterm elections. And I think with Biden, you're a year in, he's under 50% overall, and the COVID certainly showing no signs of going away completely. His handling of it, not the political asset at the end of the year, maybe, that it looked like for him at the start of the year.
And as we go into next year, you have so many people, Democrats and Republicans, looking obviously at the Senate, right? This is where it's tight. This is where there's a real question mark. I think there's probably less of a question mark on the House side. Talk through the battlegrounds.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, think just of 2018 when, Donald Trump had a brutal midterm, lost the House, lost 40 seats in the House, and yet his party was actually able to pick up seats in the Senate. I think Democrats, if you give them a little truth serum right now, they might say exactly what you just did, that the House could be a real steep thing for them to keep, but they do think they have a fighting chance in the Senate, that 50-50 balance. I think you look at it this way. For Democrats, where are their big vulnerabilities, their obvious vulnerabilities in the Senate in 2022? Georgia and Arizona, to me, loom large at the top of that list. Georgia, you got Raphael Warnock, who's going to be running for a full term, had won that sort of unusual special election runoff at the start of this year. You've got Mark Kelly in Arizona. These are two states that Joe Biden was able to win in 2020, but very, very small margins. You're talking about 10,000 votes was Biden's margin in Arizona, not much bigger in Georgia. Yeah. So again, you just look at the nature of the midterm elections we're talking about. Those are the two most vulnerable for Democrats. I think they got a couple others there. You see them on that map that are potentially vulnerable as well. And then if they're going to be losing any seats there, to counter it, that means they've got to pick up some Republican-held seats. And, there are a few that would come to mind. I think the one Democrats are most optimistic about, the Republican seat they are most optimistic about flipping. You see it there, red, Pennsylvania. Yeah. Open seat, Biden won the state. Those others, maybe Wisconsin. We'll see what Ron Johnson, the Republican incumbent, what he decides to do in terms of running. But some of those others, in the atmosphere of 2022, which you expect to be difficult for Democrats, may be difficult for Democrats to be flipping.
Steve Kornacki, not at the big board, but at your, what is that, a little board? A little monitor situation? I like it. It's adorable.
Yeah, I prefer the board, but whatever it takes to make it work.
We love you, Steve Kornacki. Thank you much. Appreciate it. Talk soon.
You got it.
Coming up on the show, Chris Noth is making headlines. Mr. Big, remember him? And not because of his Sex and the City appearance or because of Peloton. He's been dropped now by his talent agency and his show on CBS after those sexual assault allegations against him. Vaughn Hilliard has more on what he and his former co-stars now have to say about it all. The stars of the Sex and the City reboot speaking up big time after one of the show's biggest characters, or at least most notable characters, has been accused of sexual assault. Sarah Jessica Parker, Cynthia Nixon, Kristen Davis put out a joint statement on social media now, writing, quote, "We are deeply saddened to hear the allegations against Chris Noth." Noth, of course, played Mr. Big on the series. "We support the women who have come forward and shared their painful experiences. We know it must be a very difficult thing to do, and we commend them for it." Two women came forward anonymously last week into The Hollywood Reporter. One accused Noth of rape from an encounter in 2004, the other of sexual assault in 2015. Noth has called those accusations categorically false. He says the encounters were consensual. We should note NBC News has not independently spoken with any of the women or corroborated their accounts. Vaughn Hilliard is following the story for us. Vaughn, I mean, listen, he was somebody who everybody, if you knew Sex and the City, you knew Mr. Big, right? He had just debuted on the reboot. There was this whole controversy sort of over his death after riding a Peloton, then became a commercial, et cetera. And then this happened, right? His career, business, really affected by these accusations.
He literally appeared on that sequel to Sex and the City just that very first week of December here. This is the swiftness in which we are talking about the condemnation and his removal from the spotlight in Hollywood. Peloton, literally in the second week of December, just over a week and a half ago, created an ad that went viral online playing off of that sequel in which he was appearing in that show that you are now watching. And it was within a matter of days there when those allegations from the Hollywood Reporter were first reported, in which two women who have not been identified, NBC News has not been able to corroborate their allegations or identify those women ourselves. But those two individuals put forward very damning allegations. This is more than Me Too. These are allegations of assault and rape that took place in 2004 and 2015. Now he has denied these allegations here, yet this is just one step here, as now he has lost the representation of his agency, as well as he was working on negotiations to sell off the tequila company that he had formed as part of a $12 million deal. That has been now called off here this weekend. That Peloton ad has been removed. Chris Noth is no longer in the spotlight, Hallie.
There was also this third accuser that's come forward telling the Daily Beast, and I think we have a graphic to show here, that Noth forcefully groped her in 2010 at a Manhattan restaurant where she was a hostess. Has he responded to that at all?
He says that this story was fabricated. The details of this were in 2010. He says that he never met the woman, though she was not named in this story. And he said that the story is not true. But in that Daily Beast report, this is an individual, a woman who says back in 2010, she was working a late night shift as a hostess at a New York restaurant when he also then sexually assaulted her in those late evening hours against her wishes and against her will. Yet again, he has denied those allegations here. But again, I think we go back to that statement, that joint statement from Sarah Jessica Parker, Cynthia Nixon, Kristen Davis, who have known him now for more than 20 years. And their quote in their statement was, "We support the women who have come forward." He's very much on the outs here at this point, Hallie.
Vaughn Hilliard, I really appreciate you being with us. Thank you so much for that reporting. And thanks to all of you for joining us for this hour of Hallie Jackson Now. More here for you tomorrow, same time, same place. Don't forget, send in your COVID questions. Find us on Twitter. Find us on Facebook. Search for Hallie on Hallie on NBC. Wrong show, gang. Ask us your Omicron questions. We're going to answer some of them tomorrow, Wednesday, December 22nd. That's on the air, 5 o'clock Eastern. Seriously, send them whatever you want to know. I might submit some from myself, too. Glad to have you with us. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.